We are live. This is episode 85. You create the future with the decisions you make today. We are really happy to have Rick Williams joining us. Rick is the author of a leadership guidebook about making decisions called Create the Future. I have my signed copy right here. Excellent book. Jeff. What did you say?
I said that's slick to have the book.
I like that.
Here it is. But anyway, it's an excellent book. And Rick and I have known each other for a little while and always have great conversations. Rick, we're excited to have you here. And as you know, we always ask our guests, our very first question we always ask our guests is, what is on your mind? So Rick, what is on your mind?
Well, okay, we're taping this on Friday afternoon. It's like 85 degrees out here in the Boston area. Honestly, I'm thinking about going sailing this weekend, and I want to take advantage of the wonderful fall sailing weather we have here in New England, and that's what I'm planning to do. I'm going to go sailing. And Jeff, I know, as you know, I've actually written an article which I hope will be coming out shortly, entitled "Everything I Know About Leadership I Learned on My Sailboats." I absolutely believe that's true, in spite of being a Harvard Business School grad, consultant, management consultant, founder, run a company, all that. I really learned how to do all this as a leader on my sailboat. But anyway, I know that's not what we're here to talk about.
Okay, so my question is, what's an example of something you learned on your sailboat?
Well, okay, an example would be, just as a way of quickly understanding this, and we did the Newport to Bermuda sailboat race from Newport, Rhode Island to Bermuda last year. And, you are preparing the boat, getting the sails ready, all of the technology. You have to recruit the crew, train them. You're going to be outside of Coast Guard rescue for 3 or 4 days. And then when you are actually in the race, you have to have a strategy for how do you sail against the wind and the Gulf Stream across the Atlantic against the other boats. How do you keep people going at 3 o'clock in the morning? All of that is a duplication of what you need to do to be successful for founding and running a company. So it's do we have the right boat, the right sails? Do we have the right strategy? Do we have the right tactics against the conditions we're seeing at the moment in the other boats? All of that is exactly analogous, except in a sailboat race, when you're doing, a sailboat race on a Saturday, you have to do that all from beginning to end during one race and over and over and over again. So anyway, that's how I really learned it.
So I love the analogy. I have only tried to sail. I do not know how to sail. I wouldn't pretend that I can sail, but I totally get your point. I mean, it's like, but even just in the moment of like understanding, like, what do I do now? How these conditions are changing, whatever. And I actually think, to your point, you have to do it in a day or in a weekend or whatever. But I think, the point is that you're constantly adjusting to conditions. And so I'm going to sort of take that analogy back over to the business world, which is I believe that the businesses that are most resilient and most able to, sort of manage through challenges, and this, I guess the word they use now is VUCA world that we live in, is, the ones that are able to constantly make decisions that reflect the constantly changing conditions. And so it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts about, how is it, over the course of your career, I'm sure you've seen a lot of change, but how has decision making and the speed at which decision making needs to happen change over time? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, Jeff, good question. I'm going to answer the question, but I'm also just going to add one other element to this, which is the reality that we all face as leaders. And that is, every time when I go racing, I am sailing with the crew that's on the boat, the individuals who are on the boat, all of whom have their own strengths and weaknesses, their own fears, their hopes, their motivations for being there for that day, for being on a race. And that is also the challenge that every leader faces as a leader of their organization. It's the reality that they cannot be a rigid personality that only does things one way and only deals with one kind of person. They have to have the flexibility to deal with lots of different people and who have different personalities and different motivations. And so I just want to make sure we don't walk away from that dimension of reality. So, I think the question you're asking is one of, okay, think about decision making. We have to make decisions in the moment, and we also have to make decisions for the long term. And what I'm advocating is that in my book, Create the Future, is that while how you actually do it will be different if you're going through it very quickly versus we know that in this month, we're going to have to make a decision about whether we introduce this product or not. We have time to think about it. The way you do that will be different, but the steps you should go through, even if you go through them quickly, are pretty similar. What really is the opportunity we have here? What would success look like, or do we want success to look like? How can we be creative about the options we really have? So do we really understand? Sorry, say it again, Eric.
No, sorry, I thought Elena was going to jump in, and I was.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I was just going to go through quickly the steps on it. Give permission for people to come in and engage with you about being creative, about real options that you have that you may not have thought about if you just done this on your own. What are the execution barriers that you're likely to run into? Get people engaged with talking about that and trying to be realistic about it, and put up barriers that wouldn't ordinarily have come to mind initially, including cultural barriers within your own organization. And then finally, in the end, okay, how do you choose? I talk about the limitations so many people run into that by choosing the first thing that comes to mind, they may be giving up on the potential for doing things that are a much better fit for their organization and where they're really trying to go, and leave a lot of opportunity on the table. So how do you actually choose in the end what you're going to do? How do we get a path forward that best matches our goals, our risk preferences, and our values as an organization or as a leader?
So I'd like to throw in a question here, Rick, and just kind of build on what you're saying and introduce yet another variable. So you talked a lot about considering the crew that you have with you and their agendas and aspirations and the implications and the situational assessment, right? I want to ask you this. In the current reality, right, there are additional complexity, meaning technical advances, cultural changes, societal changes, and the speed of it all. We are not even going to bring AI into it. Let's just throw it in with technology, right? And the speed of it all. And yet the leaders, here we all are, right? We need to make these decisions. And you talked about the importance of making the decision for good, meaning for longer term, for the benefit of the organization, et cetera. How do you manage when things are just flying around you? Question mark.
Yeah, no, really good. Good way of developing all of this. So I say that as the leader, you have two responsibilities. You're responsible for making decisions, but you're also responsible for managing the decision-making process. And they're both equally important. So if I am the leader of my sailing crew or the leader of my company, I have to communicate those two quite different messages. One is, I will make a decision. Now, I may be a board of directors or an executive committee or whoever the decision maker is, but I, the decision maker, we will decide. We will, in the end, make a decision about about which path we're going to take to go forward. But we're also going to manage the decision-making process, and that process will be somewhat different for the different companies or different organizations, but some process that at least roughly follows the 5 steps. What do we really understand the threat we're facing? Have we really thought about what we're trying to accomplish with this? All the way through to, in the end, how are we actually going to make a decision as the leader or the organization? And often that issue is a big issue, which for smaller entrepreneurial companies, they haven't really thought through, how do we actually make a decision? Are we going to vote by majority, or are we going to, one person is going to decide, or are we going to let the share, whatever it is, think through how you're going to make a decision before you have an important decision on the table, and you haven't worked out how you will actually just make the final decision.
So
I have a question. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, I was going to ask a question on a slightly adjacent topic, which is when you're talking about the individuals, right? There are different leadership qualities that people have, and some of those leadership qualities are can be toxic as well as additive. So I kind of wrote this as two different questions, but I really feel like it's two sides of the same coin. When you're trying to think about what's the right leadership team, not just the right leadership process, but when you're thinking about who makes that team up, what is a quality that is like a must have, and what is a deal breaker quality in somebody? And I mean, I've seen people who will kill anything that's innovative because it wasn't the way we did it before or whatever. Like,
wasn't invented here, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, Eric, I actually write a lot about boards of directors. My sort of day job at this point in my career is serving on the board of directors of technology companies. And I write a lot about how to make your board of directors into a value accelerator for your company. And I'm bringing this up because it actually gets at the question you're asking. Who do you want on the board if the board is going to be in the end the decision maker? I mean, ideally. And it's part of, if I'm the CEO of a company, I may in the end be the one who will make the decision, but I also want to get people around me in what I call create the future team, who will be my leadership team and advisors. And in fact, the qualities for both the board and that team of advisors to me as a leader are pretty similar. You want people that are not mirror images of you. Right. I don't mean they're antagonistic to you, but if all you have are people that think exactly the way you do, who have the same experience that you do, who have the same background and, I don't know, education or whatever it is you want to say, who all came up through the manufacturing track or whatever it is, they're going to think very similar to the way you think. You're better off having people who have different experiences than you, have experiences that are different than you, who have, skills and expertise that are different. I don't mean radically different, that they have to be complementary to you. So, and also you have to have people that are willing to be part of the team, of a team of collaborators. If all you have is somebody who says, I don't give a damn what happens to this company, all I care about is my investment in the company, and that's why I'm on this board, and I'm going to sit here as an advocate for me and my investor, they really shouldn't be on your board of directors. And that person who's head of R&D or has an R&D project that says, I don't care about anything except getting funding for my R&D project, that person should not be part of your core advisor team. So people who are willing to be collaborators to support the success of the overall team and organization are the kinds of people I would try to get, if at all possible, into your group of decision makers and core advisors.
On this, I'd like to ask you a question, Rick, and I guess it could relate somewhat to sailing and a lot to the CEO's decision process. You talked about people who are me versus we, right? As a leader, the leader has a strong role in converting this me's into we, or hiring the team and the crew that are all we, right? How do you make decisions on that?
Okay. Well, again, it's clarity about who will decide and how the decision will be made. So that's the starting point. The second point is that you you have to say as the leader, look, I know I don't know everything. I want to hear what you are saying. I'm going to be open to learning from you. I say that the successful leaders are both decisive and vulnerable. Decisive means they're clear that they will make decisions. Vulnerable says, I might not be right about everything. I want to hear what you have to say, and I'll listen to you what you have to say. I want to learn from you.
Right.
Now, in the end, I may make a decision that's different than the way you would go, but I want to make sure that I understand your point of view and consider that when I make my decisions. That's both of those have to be in play in order to be a successful leader. The successful leader is both decisive and vulnerable, and they sound contradictory, but they really are core elements of successful leadership.
So I really love this point, Rick, that you've made in a couple of, it's sort of come up in a couple of different ways in what you're talking about. This idea that I think gets lost a lot, which is that one of the role, it's obvious that the role of the CEO is to, sort of lead the company and to, figure out, make sure they have the right team. But this really important point that you're making of that the CEO owns the decision, determining and making sure that there is a good decision-making process. To your point, like, I am going to listen, I'm going to make a decision at this point or whatever. I would say, in my experience, that's where I see leaders that I've worked with under whatever fall down, right? The most is that
I was going to say, I've never seen any CEOs that I've worked for.
First of all, I'd be interested in, in the work that you do and whatever. Do you find that that's true, that CEOs don't actually realize that this is part of their job? And how do you take a CEO who often these are people who sort of like nobody ever questions these people because they are at the apex of their company, is how do you get them to understand that this thing that they are like, no, what I hear the most is like sort of like, I just need my people to do their jobs. That's what I hear. And it's like, yeah, but the issue is, you're not doing your job. They're not, things aren't getting done. And they're just like, I just want these people to do their job. And they don't understand their role in like, hey, you need to set up the process whereby the jobs get done. So it'd be fascinating to hear, do you see this a lot? Maybe my career's been an outlier, but I've not seen a lot of people, as Eric said, I've not seen a lot of people who have, taken that on. And then when you find people who don't understand this in those leadership positions, get them to understand.
We're going to call this vibe leadership. Is the
Okay, so you bring 2 points to my mind. The first is that, and they're somewhat different points, but I'm going to make both of them. The first is that when we are early in our career, you go to a top school and you're, studying engineering or whatever it is, or computer science, and your first series of jobs, your responsibility is to prove you're an expert and you don't make any mistakes. So your job is to prove you're an expert who gets everything right, who all of your inputs to other people and to the people above you are from you as the expert. In order to become a leader, and it's whether it's a leader of your group or the department or the division, you have to move from being an expert to being a leader. And the leader is the one that says, I'm not here to be the smartest person or the brightest person or the source of all knowledge. I'm here to draw on everybody so we as a team or a company or a division succeed. That transition is really hard to make.
Yeah.
And
I always refer to that as the need to understand that your job is to no longer to do things, but to get things done. Right? Like if you're stuck.
Yes, it's a very good way of saying it. And then the separate point, Jeff, which is what you're observing, is absolutely true. I mean, there's a feedback mechanism that people say, oh, well, gee, I got into this position. I know everything that's going on. I'm the only one who has a perspective to really know what the right things to do are.
Mm.
And in addition, I mean, it's just normal psychology or human psychology that people around say, well, the boss is going to do what they want to do. We're not going to question it. We don't want to get him upset or myself in trouble.
Right.
Anyway, in my book, Create the Future, I talk about the difference between the leader who goes into their leadership team and says, I've made a decision. Here's how we're going to do it. Mary, you're going to do this. Joe, you're going to do that. You're making an announcement about what's going to be happening. It's very different if you walk into the conference room and say, we have to make a decision on whether we're going to introduce this new product or not. I have some thoughts about whether we should do this and how we should do it, but I'm not sure I really have all the answers. I want to find out what you guys are thinking. Those give two completely different messages. And too often, that person who is a division manager, whatever, who walks into that room doesn't distinguish about how they talk to their team between those two cases. And what they do is when they have a decision that needs to be made that they're not sure about, they go in and say, well, I'm thinking about this and here's what I'm thinking. And, I don't know if you guys have any different thoughts, but this is what I'm thinking. I mean, that is signaling to everybody, the boss has already made up his mind or her mind, and they're just not going to say anything. They're going to say, okay, well, whatever. And that's how you make huge mistakes. So how you talk about it in that environment where you are the leader is extremely important, because people are reluctant to offer different points of view when they don't know whether that's going to be acceptable or not acceptable. And they say, well, he's the boss, she's the boss, whatever. So I urge people to think very carefully about what do they want to come out of this meeting when they walk into that conference room. And the first thing they should do is signal what's the purpose of the meeting. If they're just there to announce something that's already going to happen, that's one thing. If they're there to try to get people to talk to them openly and take some risks, they have to talk very differently to the folks that are in that room with them.
So, Rick, I want to just kind of expand this a little bit. Outside of the decision-making process in that moment, in that boardroom or executive meeting, there is an implication on culture, right? And the leader that owns the decision-making process, to some degree, is building a certain culture. What do you see with the organizations that you work with on that respect?
I didn't quite pick up the question. Are you saying, how do you get them to do that? Is that what you're saying?
No, I said, is that something that you see with the companies that you work with, that the culture they create by owning decision-making is completely different?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just think about the difference between a manufacturing organization where it's very hierarchical. In order to be successful, exactly what you have to do step by step, versus, I don't know, an ad agency or something. I'm kind of making that up, but where, we want people to think crazy ideas and come up with different ways of thinking about, how to promote a customer's product and create visual images or whatever it is, messaging. The cultures are completely different. And you as the leader of a manufacturing hierarchical organization, you have to keep that culture of here's how we do it. We have to be very regimented for every single step we take. And that's required for success. You don't want somebody who's going to be creative. Oh, I don't care about how they did it in the past. We're going to go and change it. You don't want that kind of a person to be running that kind of an organization. But you do want somebody who thinks like that to be part of your process. If you're the CEO of the company, you want to hear from them about what's realistic about what can be done. On the other hand, the advertising agency, they have to encourage a culture of, creativity and no barriers to people thinking crazy ideas. And, somebody has to be watching the money also. So they got to make sure that part of it's handled as well. But anyway, so yes, the culture has to be reflective of what's required for success by the organization.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to jump in, Rick, because I think we shared with you before the episode started that we always have questions from ChatGPT to jump in with, and I always like to ask: would you prefer absurd first or thought-provoking first?
Say it again. You're asking me. I'd prefer what?
Would you prefer I'm going to do two questions. Would you prefer an absurd question or a thought-provoking question?
We all have to deal with absurd questions, so whatever you want. I'll take it.
I don't know whether this one's an absurd.
You'll probably get an absurd answer.
I don't know if this is an absurd question or not, but I will ask you this question again from ChatGPT. If you had to summarize all decision-making wisdom into a bumper sticker, what would it say other than "I break for bad ideas"?
I apologize, Jeff. I'm not quite hearing what you're saying.
I said, if you had to summarize, I'm sorry, my mic is causing the problem here. If you had to summarize all decision-making wisdom into a bumper sticker, what would it say other than "I break for bad ideas"? Okay.
Take time to get it right.
Okay. I love it. Excellent. I feel like we should just print them up. Awesome. All right. My thought-provoking.
Okay. Hey, Jeff, I'm gonna take advantage of this. I was asked to, which it relates to that question. I was asked to write a sort of a phrase about leadership you could write on a napkin.
Okay.
And I wrote give before asking. Giving before asking is central to successful leadership.
Absolutely. No, I love that. A great bumper sticker. Both of those would make great bumper stickers and napkin ideas. All right. My thought-provoking question is, what's more dangerous in business, analysis paralysis, or the person who proudly says, "I go with my gut" right before a board meeting?
That only happens every day, but okay.
The answer to that question is yes. Yes.
Elena, I agree with you 100%. Exactly right. No, I think they're both traps for leaders. And in truth, just as Elena said, it happens every single day. People, we are afraid. Every single one of us is afraid to make decisions. Okay, we don't want to commit ourselves, and every single one of us says, I really know how to do this. I'm just going to go with my gut instincts. Every one of us does that all of the time.
Right.
And I just, I encourage all of us to, step back, take a breath, a pause, take a walk around the block, just take a little time to try to think about what's really going on and understand what your real options are.
I think it's so interesting, as you're talking, I just keep thinking probably the best decision-making organization that I have ever worked for in my career was the Hershey Company. And to your point, they had a very strategic approach to how the business was tracked, how the business was reported on, whatever. And the discussions that we were having, which felt, I think, to some of us folks who were sort of in the middle as very, very tactical, were actually very, very strategic because they were part of a very clear decision-making process. And the result of that is that company, and I can't speak to the way it is now, I've been gone from there, but at the time, at least, that company was extremely good at decision-making, extremely good at predicting problems. In fact, I understand from somebody I know that has worked with the Hershey Company since, they were very, very good during the pandemic because they had these decision-making processes in place. They knew how to it wasn't that they knew what was going to happen. Nobody knew what was going to happen when the pandemic happened, right? But what they knew was how to deal with things happening that they had not predicted, and they were really good at sort of thinking that. So I think I really think this point you're making about how do I put a process in place so that it's not so that I can remove the uncertainty, but that I am able to deal with the uncertainty. And I think that's a real point about what you're making.
Okay, so I know that we're probably going to run out of time soon. So I want to add a story that Elena could put in her notebook about asking a future guest. So, I worked at Arthur D. Little, a big international consulting firm, for many years. And when I was there was a guy named Charlie Kensler, who was a very famous scientist. He did an awful lot of work on how to, develop cancer research sorts of things. But anyway, he had been promoted to head of all international professional consulting operations. And if we had a proposal that was going into a client that was over some dollar value, you had to go up the hierarchy of getting it approved before you could send it out. And over some value had to go to Charlie Kensler. So if I would take a proposal and they had to get Charlie's approval, I'd go into his office with the proposal in hand, and he would open the proposal to some random page and say, it says on this page you're going to do X, Y, Z. How are you going to do that? And then you had to give him on the spot an answer to whatever it was that he had randomly picked out of the middle of the proposal. If he liked what you said, he said, okay. If he didn't like it, he'd say, no, you got to go back and redo this. That was his decision-making process. So now you might say, oh my God, how could any company survive with that as a form of making important decisions, which was big proposals that he had to approve going out. But anyway, that's how he did it. So
I actually love it. You know why? Because of accountability. As the person who took that proposal up, you are accountable for what's in there. I dig it.
Every detail, right? Exactly.
I actually agree with you, Elena. I feel like there's something to that. I'm not saying it's the approach for everybody, but I think there's something interesting. We are, as you said, Rick, past the half an hour mark, and so we've come to the point in our episode where we like to go around and have everybody give one thing, leave our audience with one thing that they either want to pick up from the episode or something that you extend a thought or whatever. And I always make the guest go first. So Rick, what's one thing you would like to leave our audience with?
Well, okay, so I'm going to change the subject completely. I know Jeff and I have talked about this, that at the end of May, was part of a supply convoy from Warsaw and Poland into Ukraine, providing supplies and support for Ukraine resisting the Russian invasion. And yesterday, CEO World finally published an article I wrote about entitled "War in Ukraine," what I saw about my experiences and key takeaways from my experience, which were really quite shocking and informative. So if somebody's interested in getting a link to the article, you can go to CEO World or send me an email afterwards and I'll send you a link to the article.
Awesome. Love it. And I think that's a fascinating, case. Ukraine versus Russia is a fascinating case study in, sort of leadership styles and decision-making, whatever. And obviously a very, poignant, and human issue there as well. So it's so great that you were able to do that. Rick, before I give my one thing, what is the best way if people want to connect with you, talk with you, work with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Well, I think you're going to put up my email address. It's Rick, R-I-C-K, at rickwilliamsleadership.com. That's actually the simplest way of connecting with me.
Awesome. Excellent.
I'm on LinkedIn also if you want to go there, but that's the simplest way.
Perfect. Rick, this has been an awesome conversation. So many interesting things that you've brought up here. I think I'm gonna pick up on the point that you've mentioned a couple of times, and that has really been struck a chord with me. It's just this idea that the leadership needs to view decision-making processes as part of their job. It can't be just, I'm going to leave this up to chance. And I think that if there are a lot of, I mean, as somebody who used to work at Cracker Barrel, I'm like sort of thinking they probably could have used some of that help recently as well. Anyway, I will pass it over to Elena.
I would build on that and actually say that it's interesting the change from functional expertise and functional excellence to then functional decision making, right? To them owning the entire big organization decision making process as the growth of an individual from an early career into executive positions. So I love that message, and I truly appreciate you bringing it to light.
Thank you.
And my one thing is maybe looking a little bit at the darker side of this, which is that a lot of companies, if not the vast majority of them, don't have a good decision-making process, or at least that's my experience. Sounds like, Jeff, your experience as well, that I think CEOs kind of and leadership teams often forget that the process, and I think you mentioned this before, Rick, they don't necessarily, when they start the startup, they don't necessarily think about how those decisions are going to be made. And I think that's a really important point. And would love to see some people take that point to heart. Probably need to myself. Thank you so much, Rick. This has been a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate your being here. And we look forward to hearing more about your adventures in leadership and writing, and your adventures in sailing and going to war zones and all of that. So it's been great to meet you and to hear what you had to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.